Joe Rogan has signed a new deal with Spotify. Could be worth as much as $250 million if the reporting on this is correct. Although the initial reporting on his original Spotify deal was $100 million, it was actually more like $200 million. But I think this kind of deal really shows where Spotify is going in the audio space and in streaming, because it's a little bit different than his original deal. It's not an exclusive distribution agreement, but it does allow Spotify the ability to sell ads and really solidifies its position as the go-to platform for creators in the podcast space. So for investors, I think it's worth covering what this deal is and what it means for Spotify strategically, because Spotify has gone through some iterations of what their podcast business is going to look like, especially when you consider that music is really where the company makes most of its money, but its future growth could be dependent on advertising. And that's where Joe Rogan, I think, plays a really integral role for the company. So that's what I'm going to dig into today. My name's Travis Hoium. Thanks for watching Asymmetric Investing. Please subscribe here on YouTube for all my content. And thanks to this video sponsor, The Motley Fool. Go to fool.com/ASYM for their top 10 stocks to buy right now. I'm going to start with the official announcement from Spotify and then some of the reporting on this deal. This is from Spotify, and this is where they officially announced the multi-year partnership with the Joe Rogan Experience. It was 2020 that Rogan came to Spotify exclusively, and now there are over 2,000 episodes in the catalog on Spotify. But some of the details have come out from other news outlets on what the terms of this deal actually looks like. From Variety, they said that this is going to be worth up to $250 million, and distribution will now go to other podcast platforms. So Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, YouTube. These are other areas where people might discover and listen to Rogan's podcast. But I think the fact that he's making a deal with Spotify does show that Spotify is really the power player in the podcast business. And the part that I think was really important is that Spotify is going to handle all of the ad sales for the podcast. So according to this reporting, Rogan is going to get a minimum fee from Spotify as well as a cut of advertising revenue. Now, this is consistent with deals that Spotify has made previously with some of their other podcasts. So like the Caller Daddy podcast is now being distributed on more than Spotify. Spotify is also spending less on exclusive content. You might remember a couple of years ago, they signed deals with the Obamas, with Harry and Meghan. And I think it was pretty widely accepted that most of those exclusive deals were a really poor deal for Spotify. Not only did they not get the content that they thought they were expecting, also they didn't attract the users. And at the end of the day, if you're going to have exclusive content to your platform, you want that to be an attraction point, a magnet for your platform for customers to come in. And that's where I think keeping a relationship with Rogan is going to be really important. Rogan is the biggest name in podcasting. So as you build out music, podcasts, and audiobooks, having the biggest name in podcasting is going to be really important for Spotify, and his show is going to be really a go-to. But now it's not exclusive. So what does that mean? That means that Spotify is focusing on its creator platform and the advertising platform that comes along with it. What Spotify wants to do is it wants to be the go-to place for creators of audio products. A lot in a very similar way to YouTube is going to be the first place that you put content. If you are a video creator like myself, it's going to be where you'll be able to find the biggest audience, is where the biggest audience is going to be able to find you. So that discovery piece is really important. And then the monetization piece is the other side that's equally important. If creators can't monetize their content, then they're not going to be as attracted to the platform. This is why something like Twitter is trying to pay their creators who are attracting people and putting content on their platform. So I think all of these things play together with trying to keep Rogan in the Spotify ecosystem. So I'm going to get to a couple of the numbers that really show where we can judge some success for Spotify in podcasting and with Rogan specifically. Thanks to our friends at The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. Visit fool.com/ASYM for the top 10 stocks to buy right now. This is Spotify's financial results from the third quarter of 2023. We'll get fourth quarter results next week. But the number to look at and where Rogan can actually help Spotify in a lot of different ways is in this ad-supported line item. And what Spotify does is they include their costs for podcasts in the ad-supported segment. And this is where you're going to want to see growth. This is where Spotify, including their advertising in the Joe Rogan Experience, is going to be very important because that's going to be a big platform, attract a lot of different advertisers. And it's also going to allow them to attract advertisers that are going to go into other podcasts. This is not just about Rogan. This is about building out an advertising platform where creators can monetize their content. So 16% growth year over year in the most recent quarter, but this is pretty disappointing for Spotify. You see the ad-supported users are growing at 32%. So they need to pick up this growth rate and they need to pick up the margins as well. If you go down to the gross margin segment, you can see the margins have been kind of all over the place. If you go back a couple of years on a quarter to quarter basis, margins might be 10% and they might be negative depending on the given quarter. Like I said, that podcast costs are associated to this ad-supported gross margin segment, which maybe doesn't necessarily make sense in a lot of ways, but that's where they put that cost line item. And what we need to see is both revenue grow and also margins go up. The ad-supported business should be something more like 40, 50, 60% gross margin business. This should be very profitable for Spotify, but it's not right now. So you need to have valuable inventory to attract advertisers. You need to have that valuable inventory to attract listeners. And then you're trying to connect those two with this advertising business. And that's where this fits in Spotify's overall business plan. This is also a bit of a defensive play for Spotify. Joe Rogan can really call his shots in a lot of different ways in the podcasting business. If he wanted to sign an exclusive deal with YouTube or with Apple Podcasts, he could definitely do that. Now, I don't think either of those businesses would probably spend as Spotify can right now because they're not as invested in the podcast business. So from a defensive perspective, this allows Spotify to kind of scorch the earth. So they're going to build out this podcast business and this podcast advertising business before anybody else can. And that would be the strategic plan with keeping people like Joe Rogan in the ecosystem. It also allows Spotify's ads to show up on other platforms. And I think this is where it gets really interesting because if you're listening to Apple Podcasts, you're not getting advertising from Apple Podcasts. That's not even a capability that they're building out for content creators. So now Spotify's advertisements are going to go onto Apple Podcasts. That's how Spotify is monetizing on Apple Podcasts. Same thing with YouTube or other podcast players. So that's where expanding that distribution reach is an advantage for both Joe Rogan and for Spotify. And that's kind of the balance that they're playing there. And I think what this is showing is that keeping Rogan in the ecosystem is more important to build the advertising business than it is to just attract customers to podcasts. And I think that's the way that I'm taking this news today. We will see what they say about the agreement on the conference call next week, because I'm sure this will come up. This is a big line item, even for a company the size of Spotify. But I think this is a good move because you want to be associated with the number one person in each industry. Taylor Swift is back on Spotify. Joe Rogan is on Spotify. And I think that makes this a much more valuable position in the own your ears category that Spotify is trying to execute. What do you think about this deal? Leave your comments in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe to Asymmetric Investing. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you here next time.